If you believe in the efficacy of funerals, you're like a Neanderthal. No, really. They're the first humanoids to fuck with making a big show out of the disposal of a beloved cadaver. The Neanderthals' funerary procedures weren't so dissimilar to ours. If you were to hop into a DeLorean tricked out by Doc Brown and whip yourself back 100,000 years ago to Iraq or Israel, you might see mourners plop some animal bones into the grave along with a pretty floral arrangement and possibly a tool. Why a tool? Well, you have to remember that these mourners are human species adjacent, and so they're prone to superstition. When the skies growled, they had to think of a reason. And that reason? God. Yep, the big G. And for some reason, God's got this life shit worked out to where, for some reason, we come from nothing. And then, just like the bones into a grave, we're plopped into this world. And then, we die. When we die, we go back to whence we came. Or maybe to a new realm altogether. Why? Fuck, I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm just here to explain the ridiculous reason a moron half-ape would chuck a fucking stone tool into a grave. They do it because in the afterlife, you might need a tool. Jesus fucking Christ. You may be a bright thing and are questioning why these monkeys even bury the dead. Well, scientists say it's for religious and for secular reasons. It's anybody's guess why these beings started doing this shit. For one thing, if it's 98,000 BC and you're roaming around the Paleolithic period, hunting and gathering and occasionally fucking, and all of a sudden your parents or children fall ill and die, or they trip off a cliff and go splat, you'll be fucked up about it. You will also not have access to any psychiatric consultation, or get granted bereavement days. You can't just hole up in a dark room and moan into the abyss until the sense of tragedy fades. You still must eat. There aren't any gas stations or restaurants. You must keep living. And you can't just leave your loved one's dead body back there on the mesa. You know full well what the elements will do to a cadaver. So you bury it. Out of sight, out of mind. Or maybe you take some of that God-given fire shit and set your parent, child, or lover on fire to go to the sky and be with God again. Or you could be like those Nordic motherfuckers and shove your dead into the ocean on a skiff and watch them return to Odin in Valhalla. Which is all dandy. Some people really can't accept the meaninglessness of things and must perform a little ritual to send their loved one off. Some need the attention that comes from doing that. And that's whatever. But the fact that people are making thousands of dollars off disposal of a now useless corpse is an outrage and should be seen as such. I have no forgiveness for funeral homes' jaundiced brand of compassion, decked out in suit and tie to open doors, shut hearses, and collect fees. As to why these funeral parlors are so popular, I can only chalk that shit up to the performative drive of people. They just have to have little ceremonies. Get a job. Go there. Work till you retire. They'll throw a little party for you. Your own little ceremony. Say, hey, nice job. Way to work your fucking life away. Or fuck all that. That's a lot of work. How about you just live a year? Yep, you heard it right. If you just exist 365 days, you'll get your own little ceremony, complete with cake and prizes. What's it mean? Nothing. You didn't really do much. You just lived. Why is ceremony performed for this? Because people love to perform. Everything is an act. Everything is fake. Money, fake. Time, fake. State and country borders, fake. Life is weird. So much of life is like being at a stoplight in the middle of the night. No traffic, but you just have to sit in your car and fucking wait. Eventually, fakery catches up with us and laughs right in our fucking dying faces. And speaking of fakery and death, you add them together and you get the burial industry. This shit runs the gamut from coffins to headstones, monuments, burial garments, catering, and even suit rentals. Because, hey, what says death and rotten nothingness like a spiffy necktie? You might have stood over a freshly made up cadaver a time or two at a funeral and thought, this dead fuck never dressed like this in their entire fucking life. Or, man, Granny never wore all this caked up makeup shit. She looks ghastly. Funeral. Mourning ceremony for the dead or ego trip attention injection for the living? Why dress up death? Because people are bitches and can't handle stone cold hard facts. Kiss a cadaver. Feel the cool granite cheek. Feel the nothingness of the loved one who used to be so animated and loving. Well, now they're expired and they're never coming back. Finito. Exit fucking film. But people can't handle this type of finality. Like the aging out rock band from your teenage glory dragging their 60-year-old asses back onto the stage for one more contractually obligated limp-dicked excuse for an encore, people, in their chode-like wisdom, chode-like because this intellect is centered between the cunt of narcissism and the asshole of idiocy, need to put a spotlight on an event such as death to highlight their own wants, sadness, and feelings of woebegone abandonment. The most decked out of funerals is less about death and acceptance and more about, my pappy died and now I'm sad. Look how sad I am, everybody. And the lavish interior of the coffin, the size of the stone, the abundance of people in attendance. This is all for the dead, right? I mean, this dead was loved. Can't you see that? Look at the dollar signs and the funeral director's obsequious for a price eyes, and you can tell how much the mourners loved this fucker. That's a nice lie to tell yourself when you're wasting all this fucking money on a thing that is really not your loved one anymore, but a decaying vessel that no longer houses what you loved. But to cut straight to the fucking honesty, what you're really buying is a sign that says, look what I did. See, I loved Pappy. Look what I did to his cadaver. I gave it nice oak to lay in. Gave it the best family country bumpkin dumbass preacher who barely knew the dead fuck to talk a shit sermon like he was actually involved in the family, even though we all know this fake fucker hardly even knows us. Yeah, what your funeral is really saying is, look, my pocketbook will do the loving for me. You gotta believe me. I love so-and-so. My taxes will prove it. When, if injected with a truth serum, the reality of things would come clear. The mourner would say, I didn't spend enough time with this corpse when it was animated. I let time slide. I behaved selfishly and let them die alone. I didn't say the things I should have when I had the chance. I behaved nefariously. I chose myself over them over and over again. So now I'm making a public exhibit of this cadaver to make amends. Okay, cool. But amends to whom? The deceased? They're dead. You lost your shot. And all the glitzy funeral bullshit in the world is not going to change that. Be it a pauper's funeral or a Princess Diana's extraordinary funerary charade, it's salient to note that it all amounts to the same. When someone's dead, it's not the time for a big parade to laud your love. That time is wasted and is only for the benefit of the mourners. To truly appreciate someone after they're dead is a slap in the face of their memory if you failed to love them while alive. And even if love was never in doubt, are you truly celebrating their life? Or is this about you? Is it about you still? Would not a simple goodbye suffice? Why waste days in the checkbook of the funeral parlor? I know why. Tradition. The Neanderthals did it. But if the ways of those savages were so great, why not camp out in a fucking cave after the funeral? It's all nonsense and lacerated egos bleeding dollar bills into the system of bullshit. A well-constructed goodbye could also be in the form of cremation. After that immolating expense, tossing your loved one to the wind is free of charge and just as liberating of self. But many would scoff at this gesture for failure to fulfill their desire for an ostentatious ceremony hosted by their own entitled grief. In his book, Goodbye Things, Fumio Sasaki references Japanese painter Ryu Saburo Umihara, who left a will saying not to have a funeral and not to take up donations. He wrote the living should not be troubled for the sake of the deceased, Sasaki writes. When we really love people, isn't this how we all feel? I don't want someone agonizing over the logistics of my death on top of their grief. Set me on fire, toss me to the wind, and bid adieu. Memorials are just a bunch of malarkey and are of only value to the people who would have remembered the deceased anyway. There's no point in a fire burning for something that has long disintegrated into ash. All the memory does is signify the nothingness. So, the corpse is in the ground, and an expensive marker demonstrating that the corpse was coveted while animated sits atop the grave. Perhaps one day, scanning the gravestones lined up like discarded receipts at the bottom of the register of the money-making mortician, a cemetery stroller will note the existence of the memorial and think, well, this is a quaint reminder that one day too I shall be conqueror worm cuisine. And for all the revelation of the moment, it will only be forgotten in the thrust of daily priorities. Unpopular opinion that will gain absolutely no traction, but must be thrust into the ether, just like all of us will be eventually. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to accept your absolute nothingness now and allow your grief to be a conduit to show more empathy for the living instead of spending so much money and time attempting to heal your own ego by making amends for people who can no longer hear your funeral procession of apologies.